Hey friends, it's 5:30 p.m. on a Monday afternoon. It's kind of dreary and overcast, but there is light in the sky, so the lighting on this video looks a little bit different. I tend to make my videos at night, which is kind of I would like to make more videos in the morning. I do find that I have different moods at different times of the day. My wife is taking a nap outside, so I think I'm subconsciously speaking softer because I don't want to wake her up, maybe. So I got a comment in one of my videos about recreating myself from Anisha, and she asks, how do you recreate your narrative, or how do you change the narrative of your life? Or, yeah, so how do you change the narrative of your life? And I thought that's a really good question and something that I care very much about. And so I'm going to make a whole separate video about it. So, narratives are very powerful. What is a narrative? A narrative is, I'm not going to get all of it because it can be a lot of things. But a narrative is basically, it's a story. It's a series of events. It's an explanation about a series of events. It's an idea of where things have been, how things have gotten the way they are, and where things are going. It also contains some assumptions and beliefs about how the world is. And when I say the world, I don't necessarily mean the entire universe or the entire planet, but rather the world that you inhabit, that the narrative inhabits, right? It's the world of the story. And it's very helpful, I think, to always be examining stories like TV shows, movies, ancient mythology. Just every story happens in some fictional universe. And when I say fictional, I don't necessarily mean fake. I just mean story, right? There's a universe in the story. The story is in the universe. I mean, it's connected, right? There's some frame within which a story is being told. And there's that quote in Taoism about how the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao, in the sense that there's always more than you can capture. There's always more than you can say. Every act of communication is an act of good faith, because you can never, you don't even know everything that you know, right? And the bandwidth of communication is such that you can't convey everything that you think you know, let alone everything that you know, because you yourself don't know everything that you know, right? And you feel things that you don't know. I'm digressing. Point is, we are always born in the middle of a story, in the middle of multiple stories, right? So if you imagine your birth, wherever you're born, it's like here, and like there have been many different stories that are all happening independent of you. But your story begins with like hundreds, dozens of stories that overlap and kind of what's the word? They converge upon your birth, right? And then there's your life, however your life goes. And after you die before the end of the story, the human story, right? And then and the whole time when you're alive, there's multiple competing narratives and stories happening at the same time. And you can always retroactively, you can learn something about the past that you didn't know before, that changes the way you see yourself, or you see other people, or you see the world, right? So narratives are always being reimagined, always subject to change, always flexible in a sense, although narratives do have their own logic and structure, and they follow their own rules. And part of why everyday life can sometimes feel crazy, and we live in, I think, what feels like uncommonly crazy times, is that reality is not obligated to make narrative sense. We run after reality trying to make sense of it, but reality is not obliged to make sense. There's this concept of a Potemkin village. Potemkin, I think, was like a senior Soviet official or something, and what he would do, I believe, is, you can look this up, I'll post a link, is when like the Soviet premiers, or whoever the leaders are, they are looking to see how a city or town is doing, or a village, right? They would set up an entire fake village that looks nice, that that where they would have like people who are hired to pretend to be going about their lives and shopping and kind of being happy. And you could imagine setting up multiple Potemkin villages along a series of stops that you're gonna bring the premier on, the leader, and so you create this illusion that the country must be doing great because there's all these cities that are thriving, villages, whatever. And similarly, I do think that so I first used this analogy to describe the media, which is that the media is like a moving Potemkin village adapting after the fact to try and reconstruct an explanation for why things are the way they are. We should always remember that in the lead up to Trump's election, for example, most of the media and most of the mainstream apparatus was describing it as though it was a joke or it was not going to happen. I think there was a DNC spokeswoman who said something like, Trump brings some much needed seriousness to the Republican field. Now, I don't mean to be commenting on American politics specifically. I'm just saying that in general, there is the way things are, which nobody completely knows. Everybody might have some sense of what's going on around them, and even then that's being interpreted through the filters of what they assume to be true and their own biases and whatnot. But then there's also like a mainstream common knowledge that lags behind whatever the true reality is. And I'm not saying that true reality is knowable directly, that we could somehow some people believe this. I'm a bit of a skeptic that we could somehow convey reality as it is to a very large group of people who will all agree on what reality is, right? Which that just seems fundamentally, well, I appreciate that people are trying, although there are potential pitfalls where people who try earnestly without taking into consideration the way people are will create things that end up having worse consequences than if they didn't do anything at all. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to get to the question, which is how do you change your narrative? And my approach is you should always practice and my approach is informed by my life and my personality and my background, my upbringing, my beliefs, my experiences. So I'm not saying that everybody should wholesale attempt to do things the way I do. Rather, you should probably try and figure out the way you are and then do something that works for you. So when I'm talking about what works for me, the point isn't that this is the way, right? The point is that this is a way. It's my way, and you should figure out your own way. And I've spoken about how living in Southeast Asia, for example, it kind of automatically predisposes me to living with multiple competing narratives, right? There's Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Taoism. There's all kinds of religions. There's all kinds of languages. There's all kinds of people intermingling. There's many competing narratives, and I think narratives can also collaborate in a sense. There's just many different narratives all kind of overlaid over each other. And I used to read a lot as a kid, and that definitely helped, right? Reading about ancient mythology, reading about history, reading about how do you know what a preference cascade is in the public sphere? A preference cascade is when, and I believe this to be true, I might be wrong, I'll include the link. I believe a preference cascade is when a large group of people all seem to believe one thing or agree upon one thing, and then there's some event or it's like an avalanche, right? There's something that happens, something that clicks, something that changes, and then some group of people who probably already held the new belief but weren't sharing it publicly, they kind of speak out or they kind of assert themselves in some way, and then whatever it was that was holding everybody back, they all go along with it, right? And then suddenly you go from a country that is mostly kind of doesn't agree that gay marriage is okay, and almost overnight suddenly it's legal in the whole country, and you'll still have some people who are virulently homophobic, and you always had people who were fighting for more acceptance, but the vast majority of people in the middle, they are kind of conflicted and they don't really have strong opinions, and they basically the the algorithm that they follow, right? Or algorithm sounds technical, but when people cross a road and there's no traffic light, for example, there's a herd mentality where if other people are crossing, you feel more comfortable crossing as well. So like when there's a preference cascade with regards to something like should gay marriage be legal, once the first group of people make the switch and there is a sufficiently public event that cannot be ignored, right, or disregarded, and then most people will end up following along for the ride, sort of. And this goes in negative ways as well, right? I'm sure if you examine what happened in Nazi Germany, potentially, I don't know. I haven't read closely enough to really be assertive about the specifics of what happened, but the fact is people can change. Large groups of people can change a lot in a very short amount of time, because they're not exactly entirely reasoning their way into their new position. They are really mostly just following their leaders. Still not quite answering the question of how do you change a narrative, right? So the point is that narratives can change very dramatically, and if you're a thinking person, this should give you pause in some sense, right? That whatever the default status quo is, it won't hold. The assumption that the status quo will remain the same for an extended period of time, I would say, ever since maybe the Industrial Revolution or so, like, that's just not realistic to expect. Like, things just change too much, too fast for the present to hold. The present will change, right? Whatever is acceptable now or fashionable now, all of those things will change. So you should not, if you're a thinking person and you're trying to make good decisions for yourself, and you're trying to navigate the chaotic reality without fooling yourself, right? You want to be aware of the illusory nature of consensus and stability. Like, all of those things it's really fragile. It's really, everything can change, right? So how do you change your own narrative, right? Let's go back to the start, which is, again, what is a narrative? It's you choose a bunch of events, right? And then you construct an explanation, or even laying out a series of events implies a certain order, right? It implies that one follows the other, even though it's not necessarily true, right? If you're watching a movie and they're showing you one scene and then they show you another scene, it could be a jarring, different jump cut, but as you're watching it, you try to make sense of it in the sense of, why is the director showing me this and then showing me that? Like, do they want me to experience a sudden shocking shift? What do they want me to experience, right? And because, again, in the context of a movie that it's a curated experience. It's designed for you. You're supposed to have a certain experience. It's rarely pure chaos. And sometimes there are like artsy filmmakers who try to do something chaotic and to get you to do all the thinking and confusion and work, and then you ask them for an explanation and they're like, oh, that was the point. The point was to confuse you, which is, I think once in a while that's okay, but when you have a whole genre of people doing stuff like that, then that becomes predictable. You know what I mean? I digress again. Narratives, how do you change them? So the first thing you have to do is you have to investigate what your story is, and I recommend writing it down, like writing down the story of your life for yourself privately. Who are you? What's your name? Where were you born? Like, you start by listing out the most basics, right? Where were you born? What's your nationality? What's your ethnicity? What languages do you speak? What were your parents like? What was your family environment like? What were you start listing out those things, and then you start thinking, okay, what's your career? And then you start digging a bit deeper. Like, what did you do for fun as a child? What did you struggle with? What were some of your most memorable good experiences? What were some of your most memorable bad experiences? You have to lay all this stuff out before you can, in my experience, right? You have to lay all this stuff out before you can rework your narrative, right? What were the worst things that happened to you? Why are they why do you, and yeah, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but yeah, you list out what's the best, what's the worst, most shocking moments, most biggest surprises, things that you were wrong about, things that you were confused about, biggest upsets, right? All these kind of high points, low points, weird points, whatever. You list them all out, and then you just look at them, and you will find that you have an existing narrative of some kind. Because the brain is really good at this. The human mind is an expert at trying to make sense out of things, even if it makes narrative sense to you, even if it technically doesn't make sense in the abstract. That's the way we are. And I believe that it's, some people will say you should try your best to avoid being contained by a narrative, and so you should attempt to de-narrativize things. I don't think that works, because I just think that the impulse for human narrative is too strong. So I think the way to escape the tyranny of a single narrative is not to go from 1 to 0, but to go from 1 to like dozens, right? Or like at least like 5, or like even 2. Even 2 makes a difference, right? Or 3, like 2 or 3 different narratives that allow you to change your glasses, right? Like, so you have if you're wearing glasses and they are tainted in some way, but you don't know. Let's say they're red and you don't know that they're red. So you look around and you see everything has different gradations of color and stuff, but you don't yet realize that you can't see red because it's the same color as the lens or whatever that is. And then suppose when you take off the glasses you don't see anything. Let's just suppose that is the case, right? So you change your lens now and you try on a blue pair of glasses, and then you notice that, hey, some of the things that I saw earlier that I didn't see, I don't know how it works, but like those like 3D glasses, some of the things that are blue, right, are now invisible or whatever. And then some of the things that previously you did not see, now they jump out at you because the red and blue contrast, for example. And then so now you know what's red and what's blue, but to be certain you try on, let's say, green, and then you start to piece together what it is that the lens. So through using multiple lenses, it's like solving a puzzle. You start to understand what are the biases in each particular lens, and what gets filtered out, what gets emphasized. And then you start to see, you approximate what reality might maybe be, right? And you always have this respect for the possibility that all of those lenses might also, let's say, every single one of them, because you bought them all from the same shop, or they're made of the same material, they all have a distortionary effect in some way that you have not yet understood or discerned. Right, there has to be that's like a certain intellectual humility to understand that even if you have a diversity of lenses, there's a chance that all of the lenses are contaminated or corrupted identically in the same way. But and especially if you get all of your lenses from the same place, which is why it's good and healthy to seek out different lenses from different contexts, right? Try and make friends from other countries, make friends from people with different if you're a man, make friends with women. If you're straight, make friends with people who are gay. People who are misfits often have very clear insights into the way in which what is normal is designed. So as a straight person, I don't realize how heteronormative media is, and I'll be specific by what I mean by that. The fact that we ask very, very young children, boys and girls, when they are like 2 or 3 years old, like, do you have a boyfriend or do you have a girlfriend? So we may not realize how weird that is, but to a gay person, like if they are a boy and they like other boys and they get asked, do you have a girlfriend, that dissonance is much more jarring. And so there's that element of wait, why do we kind of sexualize romantic, like put like there is an element where there is a sense that it is normal for kids to want to role play adults. Like that is a part of healthy development, but there's also a point at which it goes too far. And the sense that in there was a period of time, I think, where practically every single movie the hero gets the girl, right? And then that becomes normalized, and like this sense of if you only watch those movies and that's your dominant narrative, right? Your dominant sense of how male-female relations work, and then you kind of, there's just that pressure or that assumption that a relationship must be consummated in some way, like you have to, like you can't be friends. Anyway, that's not what I want this video to be about. The point is that narratives end up forming, the stories that you see and hear and read, they're very powerful because they shape your set of assumptions about how things are, which is why I'm pretty serious when I say that fairy tales should come with warning labels, because there is no happily ever after, right? There's always more problems, new challenges that you have to deal with, and just the expectations that you set. I'm not saying we should ban fairy tales, but like, a lot of life turns out to be, a lot of the stress and pain of growing up, it has to do with losing your illusions, right? I think that's one of my favorite books is by Honoré de Balzac. It's called Lost Illusions, and I think there's a Guns N' Roses album, right, called Using Your Illusions, probably. Like, it's just this awareness of the nature of illusions and narratives and stories, and how they're like puppet strings in a sense. We don't, or blinders, right? We don't see what's outside of it, and being able to see outside of it is very powerful. It's also a little bit isolating when you are, but that's another topic for another day. I still haven't answered the question. I'm getting very good at this. So how do you change your narrative, right? The fastest way to change a narrative is to introduce an event or an element that contradicts the existing narrative, right? So if you have a narrative that's like, I'm an unhealthy person who eats junk food all day and who doesn't exercise, and I'll never be healthy, that kind of, I'm a slovenly person. The best way to change that narrative is to do one small thing first that contradicts that narrative slightly. So like the smallest thing you can typically do if you are a slob is to go for a walk, like 20 minutes. Just step out of your house and just walk in some direction for 10 minutes and walk back. You will elevate your heart rate, you'll be breathing deeper and heavier, and now you can introduce this sentence, which is, I'm blah, 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 I'm all those things, and on this day I went for a walk. Now the next thing you do is go for another walk, right? You want to become, and you don't have to make a huge deal out of it. I think if you overdo it, then there's this narrative weight, because there is a kind of narrative homeostasis. And homeostasis is when your body regulates its weight, regulates its temperature, tries to keep things the same. And like, I think the mind does a similar version of this narratively, where whatever the story is that you have about yourself, you will consciously or subconsciously try to maintain that narrative, right? And so if your narrative is that I'm not a fit person, I'm not a healthy person, not a health conscious person, and you go for and you try to go for like a run, like you don't even walk, but you go for a run, you will dislike the experience. It will be unpleasant. Your body will ache and hurt the next day, and so you will then use that thing, that experience and those feelings to confirm your original narrative, which is the reason that hurt so much and whatever is because I'm just not a fit and healthy person. I'm meant to be a slob. So you don't want to go too far in trying to violate a narrative overnight, because the narrative will protect itself in a sense. It has this self-regulating defense mechanism, right? So what you want to do is you want to introduce new data points that don't directly assault the narrative, the dominant narrative. Rather, you want to have something that's sort of like, just, it could potentially maybe be part of a competing narrative. So for me, I realized right now I'm going through this process where I'm reviewing my old journal entries on my 1,000 word vomits blog. And I'm finding that, I was constantly struggling with the narrative that I'm this lazy person who doesn't get anything done, who's unreliable, unpredictable, kind of sloppy, whatever. But I was slowly, and I didn't do this all at once. I didn't do it regularly, non-stop for months and months. I would do it in fits and starts. But something that you do in fits and starts can accumulate material, right? And accumulated material past a certain threshold creates a narrative in of itself, just by existing, right? So if you sketch 100 pages of sketches, even if you think that you're a shitty artist and you're never going to make a living as an artist and you're just not, you can't draw or whatever, when you draw 100 sketches, at least about 5 of them, I think, will be better than you expected. Because again, your expectations are defined by your assumptions about ability, your assumptions about creativity, your assumptions about what you can do. And being prolific in some element will almost force you to, while it might not change your original narrative overnight, it will introduce a competing narrative, which might sound like, hey, I'm not that bad actually, or hey, actually sometimes it's all right, that kind of thing. And you want to allow that to develop, and you don't want to be too pushy about it. You don't want to, so there's this phrase that I like, and I think I first saw Venkat Rao use it, which is like, he said, narrative load-bearing pillar, right? And so a load-bearing pillar in like architecture or whatever is, if you break that pillar, like the whole thing becomes structurally unsound. It might even collapse. And so if you want to break a load-bearing narrative pillar, so a load-bearing narrative pillar is some facet of your identity or your belief system that holds up your self-esteem potentially, or whatever. It's just it holds up your identity. And if you break it, everything collapses. Which isn't, with regards to breaking load-bearing columns in the narrative, I've done that before. I have to be very selective in how I recommend it. I recommend it if you're a strong person. Like if you're a person who, but again, it can go very badly. So recommending it broadly is a slightly dangerous thing to do. But it helps to make sure that you have, try and make friends from different contexts. Don't just make friends with people only from work. Try and go and try. So again, pandemic times, it's harder to try new things. But the whatever is the equivalent of trying out a dance class, an arts class, make a movie with your phone about your house, right? Just do something that you don't normally do, and you will have to introduce new explanations for why you did those things. And it might start out with, well, I was just fooling around, I was just trying to have fun, I was just wasting my time, I was just, but fine. But you just do it more and more, and things will come together in a way that you can't anticipate. And that's the fun, right? So, okay, let me think about my old narratives. I used to have this narrative of myself as as the gifted child when I was a student, because I did really well in school early on, and then I did poorly. And there's every day on Twitter you can see there's this whole formerly gifted child club where everyone comes in together to gripe and mourn about how poorly they were treated, and how there was a very unique way in which life screwed them over. And I agree, it's true. I've been through that. I have written about it. I have given interviews about it, and I am choosing to kind of think about it. You can have multiple narratives. It's like multiple audio tracks in a mix. And the bass drum is, how loud is the bass drum, how loud is the guitar, how loud is the singing. And it's like you can lower the volume, or even I always enjoy the cool way they process the music. They filter out I don't know how exactly they do it, but they filter it in a way that it sounds like you're in another room. When you're in a club or somewhere, a party with loud music, and then you go to the toilet, and then all the high ends get filtered out. You hear mostly the bass, and it sounds like it's somewhere else. So similarly, you can adjust the things in your narrative. You can adjust how you can have multiple things going on about the story that you tell yourself about who you are, and you can raise or lower them in importance, right? And I saw this really beautiful tweet from a therapist talking about how she tells her clients, right, to always carry multiple cards with them. It's the same thing. When she says cards, she means so I'm here to help you through, your trauma of whatever terrible thing that you've experienced, but don't make that the central thing about your life. You shouldn't have a central thing about your life, because when that thing breaks, or that thing gets lost, or that thing gets affected in some way, then your whole life is, in chaos, right? So think about, how you enjoyed swimming, or how you're good at giving your friends compliments, or how you like to go on hikes, whatever it is. Just find multiple things that you enjoy about yourself, or things that things that you've proud of, things that you've experienced, and carry those memories with you. I think I've traveled a few times. I regret not having taken better records, taken more pictures, written more journal entries about them, and kind of pieced together a little shrine, right? Like a digital shrine or a private notebook shrine or whatever, something that I can return to, and such that I can kind of recultivate those things about myself. And yeah, so that's the other crazy thing, right? Which is that we don't act in accordance with our central narrative 24/7. But when we do things that don't fit the narrative, we don't remember them as much. We don't revisit them as much. It's like they're peripheral things happening on the side. And, there's a stop and smell the roses aspect to this, where you can actually sit down, and I recommend doing this, go to a cafe or whatever with a notebook, and try to recall all the strange, random occurrences of your life that you don't normally bring up in conversation. Probably because it just doesn't, because the conversations that you have with people most of the time are people who already kind of opt into your narrative in a sense. So, I mean, like, if you meet someone at work, you're going to talk about work-related things, right? So you're not going to talk about, I don't know, some strange travel experience that you had backpacking, for example, or hiking or whatever. And you likely already have if you're let's say in your late 20s. If you're in your early 20s, you might just be too young. I don't know. Like if you're in your teens or early 20s, even I can't remember, but I could. So again, this is so meta, right? I could remember if I sat down to think about it. When I was a teenager, I was playing in a band. Music was a big part of my life. I was also, there was a period of time where me and a friend, we both got into writing, like fiction, and I didn't really write much, but I forget that part of my life. And now I remember it because now I have started writing again, and so I can go back and be like, hey, is this the first time I'm doing it? No, there were times where I was doing it before. There was a period of time in my early teens where I was getting into computers and robotics and stuff like that. And I hardly ever think about it. I hardly ever talk about it. But, there is a techie in me somewhere, right? And just there's many layers of these things, right? There's a part of me that wanted to be a rock star. There's a part of me that wanted to be a teacher at some point. I wanted to be a journalist. Wanted to be a game designer. Again, I guess all the things that I bring up now are going to be the things that are most similar or related to my present set of interests. But, I guess start with the realization that you contain multitudes, that you are more complex than you know. So journaling really helps with that. I highly recommend journaling every day or whenever you can, however often you feel like doing it. Just spend 10-20 minutes just writing whatever you feel like writing. Make random observations. Talk about your day. Talk about it's funny, what happened today. It's annoying. This thing annoyed me. This thing embarrassed me. This thing upset me. This thing made me happy. List out those things. If you do this for a couple of years, I think even if you do it for 6 months, when you go back to the start and read it again, you will surprise yourself because, again, there is that central narrative, kind of a chief propaganda officer of the self that maintains the central narrative, the official narrative. And there are all these other things that don't fit the central narrative that are a part of your life that you might not know or remember. And when you go back and look them up, you'll be like, oh, so your life is kind of like, just imagine, think about like a museum exhibit, like how they have a path and you walk around and there's like different things being prioritized, and there's usually like a central main big thing that's the heart of the thing, and then there's heart of the experience, right? Like if it's a astronaut thing, then there might be like a space shot, like a, what I mean, like there's just some centerpiece to the exhibit, and then there's all the peripheral stuff, and then there might be like phases, right? Like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, then the centerpiece, then phase 4, then phase 5, and then the gift shop, right? And so your life's narrative is like a museum exhibit in a sense, and you get to choose what you want to put where, and what aspects you want to play up, what aspects you want to play down, what you want to emphasize. What about yourself do you value? What do you want to revisit and grow? Because what you pay attention to, what you choose to focus on, becomes more of a thing. What do you enjoy? What do you love? If you don't know, do you want to find out? Because you can. You can find out what you care about by going on random walks and then taking notes about what. And I say random walks, I mean not necessarily literally walking, but just, if you spend a day online, check your internet history at the end of each day and scroll. And what did you end up spending time reading? Why? Why is it that you care about those things? And, you might be like, I got distracted and I was reading about Genghis Khan because that was what was popular on Twitter today. Okay, what is it about Genghis Khan that you found most interesting? Is it the fact, again, it's a mainstream news event, sort of, right? Or it's something that's happening in popular discourse. But what part of the horse, right, is most interesting to you? Is it the legs, the muscles, the hair, the amount they eat, the amount they shit, right? How fast they can run? What's your favorite horse fact? I know that sounds a bit silly, but you replicate this over everything that you do, right? And you cultivate your taste, and you cultivate a sense of what you find interesting and what's cool to you. And when you do that, you start getting better at constructing narratives, and you start getting better at kind of playing with the waves of what's good and what's not. I don't know if I've answered the question directly. Let me try and answer the question directly. How do you change a narrative? You introduce events. You first of all, you write down what the narrative is, right? And then you assess each element in the narrative for its truth value, potentially. I mean, most narratives have things in them that are not entirely true, but are kind of, they're there because they fit the story and they make the story go up and down, whatever. Chart it out. What's your narrative? Where have you been so far? Where do you think you're going? Where do you want to go, right? And so you map out the trajectory of where you are. Are you trying to please your parents? Are you trying to, get back at a teacher who was mean to you? It might not be that simple. It might be, you're passionate about space exploration. Why? Because you want to expand human consciousness. Why? Because you think that's a good thing. Why? Investigate your narrative. Keep asking questions and figure out what is, what your daily life is like. Why do you spend time doing what you do every day? What are your priorities? When you have a free day to do anything you want, what do? Do you want to hang out with your friends? Do you want to work on some creative thing? Do you want to just vegetate? I mean, suppose you've been vegetating for a month and you're done vegetating and you can work on anything you want, right? What would you like to work on? Why? And why is that your priority? Do you want to make a better media? Do you want to come up with new technology? Do you want to play in a band? Just what is it that you care about? And again, I do encounter people who are not sure, and the reason that they're not sure is kind of tragic because they have been conditioned for a long time to not pay attention to their own feelings. And so there's this whole, there's their feelings, and then there's this whole brick wall on top of their feelings, which is like obligation and coercion and, school telling them to pay attention to things, and their parents telling them what's important and what's not. And so their feelings underneath are very quiet, low in the mix, right? And so you have to, there's an act of investigation you have to do. And what you can do is go back and look at what used to happen. Talk to your friends. Talk to people who've known you for a long time and tell them you've been thinking about your life and you've been questioning things and you would like to hear from them what kind of a person you seem to them. And again, it's the same thing with the lens problem, where you could ask 5 friends from school and they might all say the same thing about what they think you are, but that's not a representative of who you are. It's a representative of what the illusion of you was like in school. Right, so you always have to be mindful of that. Don't just assume that when you ask someone about what kind of person you are, that they are telling you the objective reality, right? They are giving you their perspective through their lens. And so you want to hear from multiple people about their perspectives, and you want to try and construct a sort of, a pastiche? You put together all of the different perspectives, and if there's some perspective you really don't like, you don't necessarily have to integrate it. You can you can integrate, you can everything's a remix, right? You don't have to be the same person you used to be. You can change. You can put that in criticisms box, for example, and be like, okay, I'm going to revisit these criticisms and acknowledge them, address them, learn from them, change, right? And one of the ways you can change is, so my friends will all tell you mostly that I'm very flighty, unreliable, you know, so one thing people used to say is that I make grandiose claims, which is true. And I didn't like that about myself. I had strong feelings, and the way I expressed my strong feelings at the time was through grandiose claims. I have since learned to make my claims precise. So that thing is no longer quite true, that Visa makes grandiose claims. I try to make precise claims. Sometimes, separate story about how sometimes when I make precise claims about things that I'm confident about, people think that it's arrogance, but I just did a lot of work to make sure that I know what I'm talking about. Anyway, the truth underlying Visa likes to make grandiose claims is that Visa has strong feelings about things. And yeah, that's a useful thing to know. And that wasn't a part of my narrative for a long time. For a long time, I was just, I'm so logical, I'm so analytical, right? I'm so rational man or whatever. And those things are still true. I still try to be a logical, analytical person as much as I can. But I have strong feelings. I do care about things. And when I care about the more I care about something, the more attention and effort I'm going to put into studying the thing and making sure that I really know it inside out. And which applies to my narratives as well, which I care about, right? And I don't know if I answered the question to your satisfaction. I do think that this is one of those things where, I could try and write a couple of tweets length worth of advice, but I don't think that is what's really helpful. I think what you really need is a sense of the possibility, right? It's not about the journal entry per se. It's not about, yesterday my narrative was, I'm a person who does this. Today my narrative is, I'm a person who does that. Like, that's better than nothing. But the real thing is to see how everything is really flexible. Everything, Steve Jobs said, I repeat multiple times, that everything around you is created by people no smarter than you, and you can inspect everything, you can change things, you can reimagine reality. And there's this whole other side to the coin, like all the stories and narratives and assumptions that people make about how life is supposed to be lived. There are no rules. People make stuff up, and there are some stuff that people made up that have a lot of force and power behind them. So like there are laws, and laws are backed up with men with guns, and so you should be careful not to break laws. But marijuana is illegal in Singapore, but it's legal in California, and that's experiencing that. So I've always grown up averse to drugs, because drugs are bad and illegal, and you'll go to jail, right? And if you have too much of it, they can even hang you, kill you, right? So everyone is just, drugs are bad. Only criminals and low life people do drugs. That was the narrative I was brought up with. And over the years, I did some reading and whatnot. I'm like, oh, okay. Turns out that a bunch of really smart, high functioning people or accomplished people have some experience with drugs. So maybe the narrative that I've been told about drugs might not be the full picture. But even then, it was only really when I went to California and I went to meet friends, and there was one day on a Saturday afternoon, like early afternoon, I was sitting in Dolores Park, and there aren't very many families in like hanging out in California. It's mostly young people and dogs, right? Like I guess because the Bay Area is an expensive place to raise a family and stuff like that, so you don't see many kids. But I was there at Dolores Park on a Saturday afternoon. It was lovely weather, and it just felt so social and friendly. People just playing with their dogs, throwing frisbees, and I can't remember if there were children. There might have been, but it just felt like a very family-friendly environment. And people were smoking weed. Like, you could see them do it. You could smell. I asked what's the smell. It was weed. And a part of me was like, holy shit! Like, people are doing drugs in public in such a like in the open, like it's fine, and nobody's getting in trouble and nobody's scared. Like, experiencing that difference is a heck of a trip, like a hit trip. Like, it makes you realize how much. So if that's true, if there's such a difference in culture in terms of whether or not drugs are acceptable, and then you realize that must be true for almost everything that you think is normal or not normal, whether you have kids or you don't have kids, whether you work more or you... I was watching the last season of Modern Family, and they're in France, and there's this guy who says, I have become such a workaholic. I spend 10 to 12 hours in the office every week. Right? And it makes you realize that again, all of our assumptions about how many days you should work, how much money you should make, what you should do with your life, everything is that things that seem fixed, they only seem fixed. Even a mountain and a rainbow are both just what's the right way to frame it? A person, a mountain, and a rainbow, they all are things vibrating, should I say, at different frequencies? That sounds a bit wooey. But every one of those things is equally transient. It's just that a rainbow lasts a few minutes, maybe. A human lasts 70 years. A mountain might last millions of years. But, in the grand scheme of things, they're all ephemeral. It's just a matter of nothing is, nothing is truly permanent, even a tattoo, because eventually you'll die, right? Like, it's all about how you frame it. It's all about your sense of time scale, your sense of perspective. And when you realize that a thing that you're obsessing about is really just something that you're obsessing about within a certain context. When I was in the military, I was pretty hung up on wanting to become an officer in the military. I'm not in the military anymore, and I don't care at all. I don't think about it at all, at all. So again, it's like understanding that every narrative is happening within some context, and there's always a broader context. That there's a lot of freedom in that. That it can also be kind of you might experience a bit of existential, holy shit, there's nothing stable to stand on, kind of freak out. It's okay to freak out, but like eventually you'll realize that even if you've been freaking out for a long time, you're still here, kind of. And then you start to try and surf the waves, and then you can have a lot of fun surfing the waves of reality. Hope that was helpful. Thanks. Ask me any questions you like, and if you have any recommendations. This was a video that I made in response to a question. I would love to receive more questions, so if you have any questions for me, let me know. Thanks for hanging out. Done.